Welcome back. Honestman, Skyrim Optimized, here with Mary Abernathy for the final episode in this series. Today, I'm going to review each of the 18 skills and discuss grinding strategies for each. We're going to do some special training for archery, and then I'm going to finish up with my final endgame build. Now, before we jump into the skills, I just want to be very clear that maxing out all of the skills is definitely not required, and probably isn't even optimal, quite frankly. So much of this playthrough I've talked about being careful as far as you want a high concentration of combat skills driving your character level, since character level is what determines enemy difficulty. So if you're using a lot of non-combat skills and you're pushing a really high character level with non-combat skills, you're going to be ill-equipped to handle the stronger enemies you'll be facing. On the other hand, we can make a very capable character by really focusing in on combat skills and having that be the sole driver, or the greatest degree possible, the sole driver of our character level. Now, all that said, we're at a point now where we've effectively destroyed the power curve. Everything's going to die in 1 or 2 hits anyway, and our defensive capabilities are so robust that we're practically immortal. So we can kind of throw all that out the window and just do whatever we want skill-wise at this point. So whether or not you choose to engage in maxing out all the skills is purely up to your own discretion. For things like heavy armor, if you're not actually going to use heavy armor, there's absolutely no reason to level heavy armor. The only thing it's really going to give you is just a 100 when you look in the screen. Maybe that's enough for you. I leave that to your judgment. For the spell schools, however, there is a bit of an incentive. The final ritual spells, the most powerful spells for each spell school, the quests that unlock that are gated by your skill level. So I believe you need to get to at least level 90 in each skill in order to access those quests. So if you're really trying to open the door to all possible content, that's something to consider. But whatever the reason, we've decided that we're going to grind a skill. How can we do that as efficiently as possible? First and foremost, we obviously want to activate the appropriate Guardian Stone, whether it's Mage, Thief, or Warrior, corresponding with the skill in question. That's going to be a 20% skill gain bonus. Next, you want to get married as soon as possible. That's going to allow you to engage the Lover's Comfort bonus, which is an 8-hour temporary bonus that is applied every time you sleep in proximity to your partner in an owned bed or a rented bed. Owned by you, of course. And it is for that reason that it's very important and highly recommended that you marry someone who is also a follower so that you have access to that bonus wherever you happen to be in your travels. Last but not least, the Aetherial Crown. We want to store the Lover's Stone bonus in the crown. And then the way that works is you remove the crown prior to going to sleep so that you can engage the Lover's Comfort bonus, and then you put the crown back on. If you sleep with the crown on, which is to say if you already have the Lover's Stone bonus active and you are trying to get the Lover's Comfort bonus, that's not going to work. Those are viewed as the same bonus when that check is made. But if you just remove the crown, put it back on, you can get your Standing Stone bonus of 20%, Lover's Comfort of 15%, and Lover's Stone of another 15% active all at the same time for sort of a baseline minimum plus 50% skill gain for everything. So that's sort of our baseline recommendation / expectation if you're grinding a skill. Now, I'm going to jump into some destruction and restoration here, which I did demo in the prior episode, but some very important clarifications here. First and foremost, the reason you want to pair these two together is because just straight up healing like this doesn't do anything. You have to actually recover hit points, whether that's yourself or some other target. So you need a way to damage the target of whatever it is you're trying to heal. And that's where destruction is a perfect fit. So there, I'm actually healing some damage and therefore actually getting some restoration XP. On the other hand, both figuratively and literally, we have destruction. Destruction XP is based on spell cost. unmodified base spell cost. So the higher the spell cost of the spell, the higher your XP gain. Now it's critical to understand that shock spells have the highest spell cost. On a per rarity basis, it is always the shock spells that are the most expensive. Therefore, you should really be grinding with shock spells. I'm demonstrating Lightning Bolt here, but the bigger the cost, the better. Fire has the lowest spell cost and is therefore the worst element to grind with. Shock is the best, Frost is in the middle. Now, Shadowmere here is great to help us jumpstart Restoration and Destruction, especially at early levels, at low levels of those skills, but they really start to run out of steam at a certain point. It is for that reason that I really recommend doing some training in Destruction. That maybe feels like a bit of a cop-out, but it's definitely not going to be the advice that I give for all of these skills. Destruction, I think, is particular, especially your first trip to 100, presuming you're going to plan on legendarying it at some point. Your first trip to 100, I would definitely say invest in some training. Restoration, on the other hand, we have a much better option. And your short-term goal with Restoration, when you're grinding it, should just be to get to level 40. Once you get to level 40, you can then access Repel Lesser Undead from the spell vendors. And that is going to fast-track you to the Stratosphere. Once you have Repel Lesser Undead, you're going to want to take a field trip to Arcwind Point. This is a ruin that is located southwest of Iverstead, roughly south of Alchemist Shack. But you can't go here straight line. You're going to have to loop around to the east to get up this mountainside. And once you are here, there's probably going to be a dragon perched on top of the ruin. So you'll want to dispatch that as quickly as you can. I've already taken care of it here. He's not what we're here for. What we are here for, and why this location is special, is that it has low-level skeletons, no matter what character level you are. So here I am character level 59, and Restoration is at 53. And our Repel Lesser Undead should absolutely work against these guys. And what you want to do is just try to get as many as you can bunched up and then hit them all at once. And I'm just going to draw aggro from a bunch here. And I think the passage down here is actually the best place to try to bottleneck them. There we go. And obviously the more you can get, the better. And there we go, 54. And once they are repelled, once they are feared, you can just keep hitting them. So that is a way that you can very efficiently level Restoration once you have access to Repel Lesser Undead. Now, once you hit skill level 65, you can think about changing to Circle of Protection as a way of grinding. Quite frankly, I didn't think it was necessary. I was able to level very efficiently here just using this. Get me all the way into the 80s, that I never bothered switching. Your mileage may vary, of course. Jumping back to Shadowmere, we are on to Illusion and Conjuration. And just from the process of elimination, since we already paired Destruction and Restoration, I think pairing Illusion and Conjuration makes a ton of sense. And this is just the same spells that I demoed last session. We want Soul Trap and Muffle. And these are a great way to level their respective skill schools, and I don't think you need to deviate. I think you can use those to get you all the way into the 80s without much heartache. Now, on paper, invisibility is a consideration for Illusion, but there are a couple of problems with invisibility. First and foremost is that you can't multitask. So we can see here, if I try double casting these, the message says you cannot cast this spell while casting another. So I either need to stop casting Soul Trap to cast Invisibility, and then cast Soul Trap, or the other way around. But suffice it to say, I can't double hand spells here. So your multitasking really suffers even though you're gaining more Illusion XP. So that's really a problem. And I'd say that it's a problem because, in general, illusion with Muffle tends to outpace Conjuration with Soul Trap anyway. So you're going to get there with illusion prior to Conjuration, more likely than not. So it is for those reasons that I don't really recommend invisibility. Moving on to Alteration. Alteration is almost certainly one of the easiest skills to level in this game, due in large part to Telekinesis. And as I demonstrated in this playthrough, you can access Telekinesis almost immediately, as early as you want, just by heading over to Redwater Den, where you will find a book that will let you learn Telekinesis. And once you have that, you're all set. Now, obviously this is highly contingent upon reduced spell cost. If you do not have reduced spell cost here to 0 in particular, then this becomes a more laborious process. But nevertheless, once you are here, this is all you need for leveling Alteration. And certainly I can fast travel like this as well to really just take me to the moon. Now, if that's not your cup of tea for whatever reason, alternatives would include water breathing. That's a great spell to grind with, as well as Detect Life can be pretty good for leveling Alteration. Switching gears to the Thief skills, first and foremost, Sneak. Now, you can grind Sneak extremely quickly just by sneak attacking things. Things like our good old buddy Shadowmere here. You can give him a little sneak attack. And you definitely want to do a melee weapon. That will give you much more XP than archery. And the important thing to understand there is that damage does not matter. So both because we don't want to accidentally kill Shadowmere, and we don't want to waste charges on one of our really fancy enchanted weapons, you just need a very low level unenchanted dagger or sword or what have you. That's going to be more than sufficient for grinding Sneak. Next up is Pickpocket, and I think as I demonstrated in my Denarius survival playthrough, Pickpocket levels extremely fast, almost too fast, quite frankly. So I don't think you need much guidance there. I would say just start by stealing small amounts of gold, as whatever you can find around town, and then graduate to low-level training. So ideally you pay someone a couple hundred gold for training from level 15 to 16, and you just get into that grinder, and your pickpocket is going to go through the roof. For lockpicking, again, I don't think I need to really say much about lockpicking. I'll note that you gain lockpicking XP from breaking lockpicks. So if you're really hard up to grind lockpicking as fast as possible, you could just buy a ton of lockpicks and just keep breaking them. That will work. Jumping over to the market to talk about speech. Now, speech is another skill that I really don't think you need to bother with, but assuming we're grinding it for whatever reason, the best way to do that is by buying and selling. And in particular, we want as high a gold value as possible for the items that we are buying and selling. An important detail here is that if you are selling a stack, let's say you have 10 of something, if you sell the entire stack at once, you will only get skill XP for the value of one of those 10 items. Whereas if you sell through the stack one item at a time, you get credit for each and every one. So do be aware of that. It's sort of an implementation detail with how they calculate XP. In addition, if there's a lot of money changing hands, you might be a little disappointed at how much money the vendors have on hand. And certainly investing in the skill tree of speech can ameliorate that a little bit. You can invest in vendors. I don't really recommend that, quite frankly. I think a much better workaround of sorts would be engaging the Thieves Guild. They get some relatively high dollar value vendors in their entourage, or engaging the training. And I'm going to talk more about training in a little bit, but if you are bartering with a trainer who is also running a shop, then the money you give them for training will go towards their shop register. And that will enable you to move more money back and forth. So do be aware of that. Last but not least, if you are really serious about leveling speech, then you really want to get into the Bard's College. This isn't something that I demonstrated in my optimized playthrough here, and part of the reason I didn't is because, well, one, I don't really care about speech that much, and two, this does not work in the base game. So this is only if you are using the unofficial patch mod. And if you have the unofficial patch mod installed, once you complete the initial quest and become a fully fledged member of the Bard's College, you receive a boon called the Gift of Gab, which is a 15% increase in skill XP for speech. So again, if you're really trying to optimize speech and you are using the unofficial patch mod, then you definitely want to get into the Bard's College as soon as possible. For warrior skills, we are talking one-handed weapons, two-handed weapons, and archery. Skill XP is based on the unmodified base weapon damage. And the base weapon damage is going to correlate extremely closely with the rarity of the material in question, which is a long way of saying that a steel sword is going to produce much less XP than an ebony sword or a dragonbone sword. And that's true regardless of modifiers. So if you hone a steel sword to be 200 damage and you compare that to a 20 damage dragonbone sword, it's still the dragonbone sword that's going to produce more skill XP. So modifiers don't mean anything. It's just the base weapon damage. Now for armor, it's still based on damage, but it's a damage coming at you. And specifically, it's the unmodified raw damage number that informs how much skill XP you get for light armor and heavy armor. Which is to say that if you can push really high armor values, that's going to enable you to grind armor much more easily, right? Because that's going to allow you to stand up to stronger and stronger enemies without fear of accidentally getting killed. Ultimately, what you want to do is you want to go play with some giants. That's going to be the best way to grind armor. And obviously in doing that, you want to have really high armor values on the equipment that you're wearing. In addition, be sure to note that the number of pieces of equipment absolutely is a factor. So if you are fully decked out in light armor, that's going to facilitate faster gain than if you only have one piece equipped. For blocking, it's very similar but a little bit different. Blocking is based on the amount of damage resisted. So it's not based on the raw incoming damage, it's how much of it did you block. And what that means is that block is one of the skills, one of the rare skills that has a positive feedback loop. Because the higher your rank in shield wall, the more you're going to mitigate, the more XP you're going to get. That's not to say that I recommend doing that. I don't. As you can see here, I still only have one perk into shield wall, but I just did want to note that there's some special feedback loop there. Also note that with blocking, actually blocking, which is to say mitigating damage, delivers way more XP than doing a shield bash. So when you're out there playing with the giants, trying to level your blocking, you want to just block. You just want to hold down the block button. That's it. You don't want to be shield bashing. And finally, getting to the crafting skills, starting with enchanting. Now, disenchanting items is certainly a great source of XP, but you can't really grind that. That's like one time only. So I'm going to focus the discussion on enchanting. And when it comes to enchanting, the amount of skill XP you get is not affected by the item value, nor the potency of the enchantment, nor the size of the soul gem. So you can just use the cheapest items you have at your disposal, with the smallest soul gems you have at your disposal, and with whichever enchantment you may have at your disposal. In that same vein, since the item value doesn't affect anything, nor does the enchantment, Seeker of Sorcery, if you have the Seeker of Sorcery boon active, that doesn't actually affect the amount of skill gain you get for enchanting. Now, don't get me wrong, you still want to do it. That's going to improve your enchanting potency, which is therefore going to improve the value of the item, which is going to help your bank account, but is not going to affect your skill gain. So just be aware of that. For a more detailed look at maxing out enchanting, please refer to episode 9 of the Optimized series. I'll have a card for that here. Next up is alchemy. The amount of skill XP you gain for alchemy is based on the value of the potion in question. So the higher the value, the more skill XP. Because of that fact, alchemy has a ton of positive feedback loops to accelerate skill gain. First and foremost is Alchemist. This is going to improve the value of everything you do at the Alchemist table. So more points into here means higher potion value, which means more skill XP. In addition, we have Physician, Benefactor, and Poisoner. And each of these three are going to affect certain potions or poisons. But in all cases, they're going to improve the value of those respective potions, which means more skill XP. Obviously, I chose to forego Poisoner here. I didn't have any trouble leveling Alchemy without it, but it's something to consider, especially if you are planning to utilize those poisons instead of just sell them. Another bonus that we can apply here is the Seeker of Shadows boon from the Sallow Regent Black Book. That's going to give us a 10% improvement to Alchemy, which is going to increase potion values and give us more XP. Last but not least, we can't forget our crafting gear. We want to bring as many of these enchantments to bear as possible, and that's going to improve the potency of our potions, which is going to improve their value, which is going to give us even more skill XP. I'll have a card here for episode 10 of my optimized series. Check that out if you want a detailed walkthrough on maxing out Alchemy. And finally, we have smithing. For smithing, there's item creation and item modification. In both cases, value is sort of your guiding light. The higher the value of the item you create, the more XP you're going to get, and the higher the value added in the case of item improvement, the more XP you're going to get. So just like with alchemy, our crafting gear is critical in the case of weapon improvements. This is going to come into scope when we are improving weapons and armor. In that same vein, you're going to want Seeker of Might active. This is going to improve your smithing capabilities, which should therefore improve the value that you are adding to items. In addition, don't forget about Ancient Knowledge, which is a permanent boon that gives you a 15% skill increase for blacksmithing. And of course, be sure to have the Notched Pickaxe equipped. And once again, this is unfortunately bugged in the base game, but the unofficial patch mod fixes this. It should give you a flat +5 to your smithing. All in all, smithing gives you a lot of different choices for how you want to approach it. In this particular playthrough, I did a lot of training, but most of my XP came from item creation, not item improvement. So we really didn't even engage some of those positive feedback loops. We made a lot of jewelry and more than a few dwarven bows. Combined with all of our bonuses, that was more than enough to get us to 100. For subsequent trips to 100, if you decide to do multiple, it gets much, much easier. Right? You're going to be later in the game, you're going to be picking up higher level equipment like Ebony, and being able to do high level improvements there is going to give you a lot of XP. Overall, as long as you are conserving books and using appropriate bonuses, you really don't need to level anything higher than level 89. And that's because there's 5 skill books per skill, and each skill book should give us 2 levels, assuming we are using the Scholar's Insight boon from the Winds of Change Black Book. In addition, the Bard Instrument quests give us an additional +1 to all of the skills. So everything has 11 right up front, and we obviously want to save those 11 levels for the most difficult levels, the highest levels. And of course, don't forget about Agma Infinium. This is going to give you +5 skill levels to every skill within a particular constellation, Mage, Warrior, or Thief. For me personally, I think Mage is the most value for this, but your mileage may vary. Paying trainers for skill levels is obviously an important tool as well. Don't forget about that in your planning. That's great for catching things up or just addressing things that are particularly annoying. For me, destruction falls into that category. How you choose to finance that training is obviously up to your discretion. Pickpocketing can be a great tool. Alchemy can be a great moneymaker. Enchanting can be a great moneymaker. Ultimately, in terms of what's optimal, I think it depends on exactly how much training you are after. In this playthrough, I went pretty wide. I was after one-handed weapons, archery, light armor, blocking, and sneak. All 5 of those really played into my core combat. So that's an awful lot of skills to try to level, which meant I was putting an awful lot of investment into training to try to keep those level set. For that reason, I think Pickpocket makes sense, but if you are going more focused, I think it favors more of a bartering approach. And the reason is because pickpocketing, if you're doing it right, will only max out once. In my Daenerys playthrough, I did it wrong and I kept legendarying it. I think ideally you just want to max it once and then keep utilizing it from there. So, in other words, you are maxing out one skill, you are diluting your character level through one non-combat skill for the sake of a bunch of combat skills. For a barter approach, you're going to be leveling multiple non-combat skills. So in the example of alchemy, you're going to be pushing your alchemy skill, obviously, but then perhaps less obvious is that you're going to sell those potions and improve your speech skill. So now you're leveling 2 non-combat skills instead of just 1 in the case of pickpocket. So if you're really going to push a ton of money into training, I think it favors a pickpocket approach. If you're more focused on just a couple of combat skills, I think it favors a barter approach. Because thankfully, speech doesn't level nearly as fast as pickpocket. And I think you can get it done with relatively modest alchemy and speech scores. And finally, don't forget about quest rewards. There are various quests throughout Skyrim that will reward you with a free skill rank in 1 or more skills. So that can definitely affect your plans. In particular, I'm going to highlight block. With the 10 points from the skill books that I mentioned earlier, and the 1 point from the Bard's Instrument quest, there's an additional 5 ranks available through free training in block. So you can sort of be done with block once you're at level 84 and just freeload your way to the end. And this is not counting bonus XP as well. You can also factor that in. So if you're really managing your bonus XP wisely, you're probably looking at like the low 80s for a lot of skills, and you're basically done. Taking the prize for most free skill ranks, however, is archery. In addition to the books and instrument quests, there are a total of 7 additional free training ranks available for archery. And that's due in large part to one particular quest, which we're going to check out right now. On the move for a special field trip, we are all the way down near Falkreath, overlooking Falkreath, as a matter of fact. There is a special location up here which is going to give us a whole lot of archery training. And to get here, you're certainly going to have to swing around to the east to get up the mountainside. But once you are here, you will find a cabin. And this cabin is owned by someone named Angie. And she doesn't like people so much, obviously, which is why she likes it here. Oh, there she is.
Name's Angie, and if you try anything stupid, I won't hesitate to put an arrow in your head.
She's got a lot of charm. Calm down, I'm not going to hurt you.
Sorry, a girl can't be too careful out here. Like I said, name's Angie, and I've been living out here for a couple of years now.
Why?
I moved here from Helgen after my family was killed. At the time, I couldn't stand to be around anyone. They all felt sorry for me, and I didn't want them to. It was my problem, not theirs.
I'm sorry to hear about that.
Don't be like them. Don't feel sorry for me.
Who killed your family?
2 Imperial drunks who thought they were above the law.
Want me to take care of them?
Already did. Part of the reason I'm living out here now. Thanks for offering, though.
Sure. I noticed those targets you have set up. What are those for?
I set up those targets a long time ago. I shoot at them from time to time. Don't want to get rusty with my bow.
Right. Are you any good?
That I am. You know how to use one?
Let's just say Hircine would be jealous.
Well, let me know if you ever want to practice. If you need a bow, there's one on the rack to the left of the door.
Well, I'm ready for practice.
Excellent. Follow me to the targets and we'll begin. My father was rarely home, so it was my mother who actually taught me how to use a bow. She always said composure was the key to a successful archer. If you can remain calm, even in the midst of chaos, your arrow will most likely find its target. Okay, let's see what you can do. Remember to stay within the boundaries and only use the practice arrows. I have some if you don't have any. Aim for the middle target.
Okay, so I have my practice arrows ready to go, and I've switched to the Zephyr bow for the purpose of this exercise.
Hey, what? Nice shot, right on target. Now hit the target to the left.
So she just gave me a full rank in archery there. I was at 82.
Great shot. Now hit the target to the right. Big, nice shot, right on target. Let me know if you want to practice some more. Next time we'll make it a little more challenging.
Oh, really?
My older brother took me out hunting a lot when I was little. At the time, it was difficult to keep food on the table, let alone have enough left over to sell at the market. So whenever we came across more than one deer in a single location, it was imperative we kill as many as we could. If you can learn to keep your composure and trust that each shot is true, then you should be able to quickly handle multiple targets. When I tell you to, try and hit each of the 3 closest targets in 8 seconds. I'll count to 3 and then say go. You have 8 seconds to hit each of the 3 targets. Draw string and get ready. 1, 2, 3... Go! Be careful. You did it! All 3 targets in 8 seconds. Nice job. Let me know if you want to practice some more. Next time we'll make it a little more challenging.
Okay, just checking in quick before the next round of practice. I started at Archery 82, which is basically done because there are 18 levels of free training available, including the skill books, not counting Agma Infinium. She's awarded us 4 levels so far, so we're up to 86, and she should give us 2 more. So we'll be at 88 easily, and almost certainly have a full bar towards 89.
We've talked about speed and composure. Now we'll go over precision. Oftentimes, you won't be able to get as close to your prey as you'd like, and you'll have to settle with a long shot. However, with such a long shot, it's more than likely that's the only shot you'll be able to take before your prey runs off. If you find yourself in such a situation, then you need to make your shot count. Don't rush your shot. Crouch down, get comfortable, and take aim. Okay, your turn. Try and hit the target way in the back, far behind the other 3. Remember to take your time and make your shot count.
Okay, I'm switching over to my Dragonbone bow here because it's going to have less arrow drop. The arrow's going to fall off less in flight compared to the Zephyr bow. More tensile strength on the bowstring, if you will. I think I might need to account for it just a little bit anyway, so I'm going to go a little high.
Be careful.
See if that...
Nice shot, right on target.
Nailed it.
Let me know if you want to practice some more. Next time we'll make it a little more challenging. We've talked about composure, speed, and precision. Now it's time to use all 3 at once. I'm warning you now. This challenge will be quite difficult. Just remember everything I've taught you, and you should be able to complete it. It may take you a couple of tries, but that's what practice is all about. When I tell you to, try and hit all 4 targets in 10 seconds. I'll count to 3 and then say go. You have 10 seconds to hit each of the 4 targets. Drawstring and get ready.
Okay.
1, 2, 3. Go! Be careful.
I'm going to keep with the dragon bone here just because I feel like I have a good feel for that far target.
You did it. All 4 targets in 10 seconds. Nice job.
There we go.
I think I've taught you everything I know. You might even be as good as me now. Kind of scary if I think about it.
Thanks.
It was my pleasure. It's not often I get visitors out here, let alone friendly ones. Thanks for sticking around and keeping me company. It was nice to finally meet someone out here who doesn't want to rob you or take off your head. I know it isn't much, but here, take this bow. It was given to me by my family. It's special to me, but brings back too many painful memories. Remember, composure and speed. You don't need to see your arrow hit before moving on to your next target. Trust your shot is true.
And there we go. That gets us from Archery 82 to Archery 88. And basically like one shot from 89. And then we can easily finish off with books as well as the Bard Instrument Quest if we need it. We probably don't even need it. And the reward there was Angie's Bow, which unfortunately isn't really special at all, just the name, but a fun item to collect nonetheless. And now for my endgame setup. First, let's talk about defense. For actual armor value, you can see I have 148 armor on my boots and gauntlets, 146 on the shield, but we're not going to count that because I'm not always going to have that equipped, and 298 on the chest piece. In addition, there is a hidden plus 25 on every piece of armor you have equipped. So again, ignoring the shield, we're just going to count 3 pieces: boots, gloves, and chest piece. So that's plus 75 in addition to the numbers shown here. On top of that, the blessing, the standing stone that you want for your end game setup, where we no longer care about skill gain, is the Lord Stone. The Lord Stone gives you 50 armor and 25% magic resist. More on that in a second. So with the 50 armor here, as well as the values outlined here, that puts us well over 700, which is more than sufficient because the armor cap is 667. So we are over the armor cap here, which does not eliminate damage, but it is the maximum amount of physical damage mitigation possible. For magical damage, that's where our magic resist comes into play, and that's why I choose the Savior's Hide here. We have 15% from Agent of Mara, 30% from the Alteration skill tree, 15% from Savior's Hide, and don't forget about that 25% from the Lord's Stone. All that together is 85%. The cap for magic resistance is 85%. So this puts us precisely at the cap for magic resist. In addition, this is sort of rubbing it in. You don't really need this, but I have Atronach in the Alteration skill tree, which absorbs 30% of magicka spells. For elemental mitigation, we have 77% resistance for fire on the boots, and then the shield allows us to bring to bear 97% resistance for frost and 77% resistance for shock. So covering all of our bases. All of this taken together, the way that works is that the absorption gets resolved first. So we have a 30% chance of simply not taking any damage at all. If we cared about magic, we would actually absorb that into our mana pool. This particular build, it does not care about magic. So it's just a 30% chance to negate magic. Of the 70% chance for a spell to get through, it first gets applied to our magic resistance. So that damage will be reduced by 85% from our magic resist. After that, then our elemental resistance comes into play. So in the case of fire, assuming it doesn't get absorbed by that 30% chance and it actually gets through, it's going to be reduced 85% by our magic resistance, and then reduced an additional 77% 85% by our fire resistance. So it'll be 85% reduction, and then that remainder will be reduced 77%. So tiny, tiny amount of damage getting through on fire. For frost, we had 97% resist. Part of that is wasted. The cap for elemental resist is 85%, just like magic resist. So we're over the cap there, which is fine. It'll work the same. It'll be 85% reduction from magic resist, and then 85% reduction again from frost resist. Certainly the shield is situational, but frost and shock damage, I would say, are also the most situational elements. So that's part of why I went with fire on the boots. And certainly part of why I went with frost on the shield is because we get that ice bonus from the Stalrim shield. For offensive capabilities, we have a 67% enchantment for both bows and one-handed damage on the ring, on the necklace, and on the gloves. In addition, the boots have an additional 67% for one-handed damage, and my headpiece has an additional 67% for bow damage. The kicker here, the other enchantment here is Magicka. You can go whichever direction you want there. I just didn't see anything of higher value, and for me, Magicka is pretty low value, quite frankly, but nevertheless, you have flexibility there. And the headpiece itself, like this circlet, is purely cosmetic. I'll be the very first to admit that. We don't need the armor. If you wanted to do armor, you can, but we don't need the armor. We're already over the cap. So whatever you want to do for headpiece, I think purely comes down to aesthetics. Last but not least, for defense, we have Savior's Hide giving us 50% poison resistance, as well as Snake Blood from the Alchemy skill tree giving us 50% poison resistance. I believe that just like with the elements, the cap for poison resist is 85%. So we're over that here. And then of course, if we're just rolling around end game, I have Seeker of Might active, which increases my combat capabilities by 10%. All of that together, you can see that our Stalrim sword has a base damage of 1069. And the image on the right there actually truncates the ones digit. It says 106, but on the left you can very clearly see it's 1069. On top of that, there's a 50% chance of fire, frost, and shock, 340 points, as well as 216 points of frost damage. And I will emphasize that the chaos enchantment there, that 50% chance, that gets resolved for each element independently. So it's not just a straight up coin flip that you're going to get it or not, it's 3 coin flips. And it's possible to proc fire, frost, and shock, or none of the 3, depending on your luck. But either way, that's a boatload of enchantment damage, and you're guaranteed to get that 216 from just straight up frost. And then we do have the option of the Stalrim bow, which weighs in at 1112 base damage, which has that same set of enchantments from the sword. 340 points of chaos possible per element, and then 216 frost. As I mentioned in prior episodes, the Stalrim bow, however, does have a much slower draw speed compared to the Dragonbone bow, and for that reason, I prefer the Dragonbone, which weighs in at 1147 base damage, and the enchantments, we have 273 points of chaos damage for each element possible, and then I have 172 points of fire damage as the kicker. Now, even though I did choose fire for the enchantment on my bow, the bow that I created for Ayla is probably superior. Hers is chaos and shock. And the reason I say that is because there aren't any enemies in the base game that resist shock, but there are enemies that resist frost and fire. So if we're trying to really go optimal, which is the entire point of this series, I have to highlight that. Shock is probably the better element if you're picking one of the 3. That said, the expansions did introduce some enemies with shock resistance, so it's a little bit more of an even playing field, but I'd still argue that in aggregate, if you're choosing a single element, shock is probably the best single element. On the topic of follower enchantments, I'm going to have a link in the description to the unofficial Elder Scroll pages. They have an excellent resource there that outlines follower enchantments. The good news is that weapon enchantments work exactly the way that you would expect. The bad news is that armor enchantments do not. So if you think that you are going to improve the sneakiness of your follower by giving them plus sneak gear, unfortunately that's not going to do anything. So definitely review that page to see what works and does not work. From my perspective, it's a really small list. You want to prioritize magic resistance, poison resistance, and just straight up armor value. In addition, even though sneak doesn't work, muffle does. So you may want to consider muffling the boots of your follower. In addition to that, many people like carry weight on their follower, so that's definitely an option. At this point in the game, I really don't need to be carrying much, so that's not a big consideration, but just FYI. Also critical to note that followers can maximize magic resistance, which is to say they do not have the same cap that the player character does. We are capped at 85% magic resist. Followers, however, do not have that restriction. They can go all the way to 100% magic resistance. So once we have that on Ayla here, she doesn't actually need any elemental resistance, right? Because the magic resist gets resolved first, and that's going to negate all magical damage. So that's the key setup for your follower. And that's going to be a wrap. Thus concludes our Skyrim optimized journey with Mary Abernathy. And if you've been following along, you'll know that there's dozens, if not hundreds of hours of content still ahead of us. There's the main storyline to finish, there's the Dragonborn expansion to finish, Dawnguard. There's tons of content still ahead of us if we choose to engage it. So maximizing your character, as I've demonstrated here, doesn't have to be the end of your campaign. It could just be the beginning. But in any case, that's going to do it for now. Thank you all so much. Please like and subscribe. This has been Honestman, and I will see you next time.